The grand hall of the Valoran royal palace stretched endlessly, its soaring spires of obsidian and crystal reflecting the last light of the twin suns. Dragons in humanoid form, resplendent in scales that shimmered like molten metals, lined the upper balconies. Their eyes, sharp and calculating, followed every human delegate as they filed into the marble chamber below. The air was thick with etheric energy, a faint hum vibrating through the floor, walls, and even the air itself, as if the building itself were alive and listening. Humans moved cautiously among the opulence, their mechanical gauntlets clanking softly, the smell of lubricants and heated metal trailing behind them. The contrast between the two peoples was stark. Dragons radiating an almost predatory elegance, humans moving with industrious determination, their hands busy with tools and devices that whirred and clicked in preparation for the summit. At the far end of the hall, elevated on a dais carved from black stone and inlaid with veins of gold, sat Empress Zyra Draconis. Her form was humanoid, lithe and commanding, with scales that shimmered deep crimson and violet, catching the light in patterns that seemed almost alive. Around her neck hung the pendant, a jewel that pulsed faintly with a soft inner fire. It was encased in a setting of dragonbone and etched with runes that only a few in the Empire could read. Zyra's eyes swept across the crowd, taking in the human representatives with a mixture of amusement and disdain. She raised a clawed hand and let the pendant catch the sunlight, sending prismatic sparks dancing across the hall. A ripple of murmurs ran through the humans, a mix of awe and subtle fear. Kieran Tallow stood at the back, near the heavy bronze doors, his hands folded over a set of mechanical schematics. His frame was lean, fingers smeared with oil, and his eyes sharp behind goggles that reflected the light. He had traveled days from Grensport, carrying not just his tools but a history he barely understood himself. The pendant around Zyra's neck stirred something in him, a memory of a simpler time in his mother's workshop, the smell of ink, oil, and faint traces of herbs that burned in her small alchemy stove. He had never touched the pendant, had never even seen it in her hands except in fleeting glimpses before her death, yet the sensation of recognition burned through him with the clarity of a bell. The summit began with formalities. Dragons spoke first, their voices rich and resonant, carrying across the hall without amplification. "The Empire of Draconis extends its hand for peace," Zyra intoned, her eyes glinting with a sharp edge. "We do not forget the failures of the past, but we are willing to observe your diligence." The human delegates murmured among themselves, bowing low, careful to avoid any movement that might appear aggressive. The human voice came hesitantly but with purpose, as the lead diplomat of the Industrial Council stepped forward. "We accept your offer of dialogue, Your Majesty, though we remind you that human ingenuity is a force not to be underestimated." His words were polite but firm, underscored by the soft clatter of mechanical gadgets in his satchel, quietly mapping etheric currents for analysis. Zyra's laugh, low and melodic, rolled over the assembly like distant thunder. "Force, you say? Humans have always been clever with machines. But cleverness without the blood of dragons is little more than curiosity. Tell me, what marvels have your smiths and engineers truly created that can match the centuries of dragon mastery?" She lifted the pendant higher, letting it swing like a pendulum. The light refracted across the polished floor and caught Kieran's gaze, the familiar pattern of etchings and the warmth of memory filling his chest with a sudden ache. Something inside him stirred, quiet at first, then insistent, like a whisper pressing against his mind. He had to speak. "Your Majesty," Kieran's voice rang clear, cutting through the murmurs and the distant hum of etheric energy. Heads turned. The Empress paused, her lips curling in a smile that was equal parts amusement and irritation. "That pendant was my mother's." The words were quiet, matter-of-fact, but carried weight that seemed to expand in the hall. Gasps echoed softly through the human delegates. The dragons stiffened, their eyes narrowing, sensing a tremor in the ether around the jewel. Zyra laughed again, sharper this time, a sound that was meant to dismiss the claim entirely. A child claiming royal relics now, amusing certainly but patently impossible. "That pendant has rested with my line for centuries. You would mock the traditions of dragons with mere words." Kieran did not flinch. His hand brushed against the pendant-shaped medallion he kept in his pocket, a small charm his mother had left him, its metal worn and etched with lines that matched the patterns he saw now on Zyra's necklace. He felt it resonate faintly, responding to the echo of memory and bloodline. The hum in the room grew louder, almost imperceptibly at first, like the soft ringing of a distant bell. Delegates turned to each other, whispering. Dragons shifted uneasily in their seats, a tension rising that even the most disciplined courtiers could not hide. Zyra's smile faltered. Her eyes widened ever so slightly as the jewel on her chest began to glow, faintly at first, then more insistently, as though it had recognized a voice it had not heard in centuries. For a moment the hall was silent, save for the soft pulse of the pendant. Zyra's lips parted but no words came. Her head tilted slightly and her sharp gaze locked on Kieran as if seeing him for the first time. Marshal Calith, standing beside her, stiffened, his hand twitching toward the ceremonial dagger at his belt. He understood immediately. The relic was reacting to him, to the human, in ways no dragon had foreseen. The room held its collective breath, the fragile boundary between diplomacy and chaos thinning by the second. Kieran remained still, feeling the pendant's warmth spread through the air toward him, and for the first time he understood that the summit would not be about words or treaties alone. It would be about destiny, about the bloodlines that had slept too long. The twin suns dipped lower, sending long shadows across the polished marble, and the Empress remained silent, her usual command subdued by a truth she could not yet speak. The first tremor in centuries had begun, and all of Valora felt it. Kieran's words hung in the air, and for a moment, even the usual clamor of the summit felt muted. The pendant continued to pulse, each glow synchronizing with the faint resonance in his chest, as though the memory of his mother had summoned it across time. Delegates shifted nervously, some whispering, others staring wide-eyed at the human whose voice had dared to pierce the centuries of dragon authority. Marshal Calith's hand twitched again, and Kieran could feel the tension radiating from him like static. The Empress's crimson eyes remained locked on him, a mixture of disbelief and something more dangerous, caution. What did you say? Zyra's voice was lower now, controlled but tense. The amusement of before had drained away, replaced by a sharp edge that made the edges of the room seem colder. She leaned forward slightly, the pendant swinging gently as if in response to her heartbeat, its glow intensifying ever so subtly. Kieran felt the warmth of it through the hum of the air, an almost imperceptible tug that filled him with a strange certainty. My mother owned it, Kieran said again, stepping slightly forward. He didn't raise his voice, but there was a calm authority in the tone that seemed to settle some of the murmurs. She hid it, kept it safe, and I never realized until now that it was more than jewelry. It's mine as much as it is yours. The hall was silent except for the faint hum of etheric energy vibrating against the stone walls. The human delegates shifted uneasily, unsure whether to look at him with pride or fear. The dragons, however, tensed as if the statement itself were a blade drawn against their centuries of certainty. Zyra's gaze narrowed. Her claws flexed against the stone armrests and her tail swished behind her, just visible in the shimmer of her robes. You dare claim the blood of Draconis? She demanded, her voice rising slightly but still steady enough to carry authority. You are nothing but a mechanic, a child of industry and smoke. This hall is mine, the summit is mine. How could any human believe they have a right to such a relic? Kieran's eyes did not waver. I don't need to believe. It remembers me, it responds. He reached into his satchel and with deliberate care lifted a small charm wrapped in oilcloth. It was dull, plain, but when he held it next to the pendant, a faint shimmer ran between the two, like a current of light snapping across a gap of air. Murmurs rippled through the hall again, louder this time. Some humans whispered, shocked, others glanced nervously at the dragons. Even Marshal Calith's hand froze in mid-motion, his jaw tightening as he observed the interaction. Zyra's laugh came next, sharp and brittle as though attempting to dispel the truth. A trick of light? A clever device, no doubt, created by your industrious kind, but no magic of yours, no artifact could command the power of Draconis bloodlines. She raised her hand toward the pendant, fingers curling as if to snatch it back, and yet something in the jewel's glow made her hesitate. It pulsed, not just with light but with a resonance she could feel in her bones, a vibration that responded solely to Kieran's presence. Her usual confidence wavered. The room, which had seemed impregnable under her command, suddenly felt fragile. Kieran felt the pulse of energy again, stronger this time. It wasn't dangerous, not in the way the etheric weapons of dragons could be, but it was intimate, almost sentient. He could feel the echoes of his mother's memory in it. The quiet workbench in Grensport, the smell of heated metal and herbs, the meticulous care with which she had wrapped the pendant every night. He understood in a way he hadn't before that the pendant was a key. A key not just to power but to history, to the connection between bloodlines long thought separate. The human delegates shifted forward, emboldened by Kieran's composure. One of them, an elder engineer, whispered, "He speaks the truth. We've heard legends, but none dared." His voice trailed off as he glanced at the glowing jewel, a shiver running through him. Even among humans, the quiet awe was tangible. Zyra's eyes darkened as she considered her options. She could strike, summon her etheric guard, and remove Kieran from the summit entirely. She could dismiss him, declare him a liar, and continue the display of power that had always maintained her supremacy. And yet, the jewel throbbed in a rhythm that resonated with Kieran, almost as if acknowledging an ancient pact, a long-forgotten lineage that neither dragon nor human had fully understood. Her pride wrestled with fear. She had never known an artifact to respond this way. Never, not in centuries. Marshal Calith shifted behind her, whispering, "Your Majesty, we must act. This could be a trap." His words were tense, sharp, yet there was hesitation in his voice. He too could sense the power, the ancient resonance that pulsed in the hall. His instincts screamed caution, yet the human boy did not seem threatening in the conventional sense. The jewel itself was reacting, choosing him, and no force of ether or blade could deny it. Kieran took another step forward, holding the small charm at chest height. "It doesn't matter if you believe me," he said calmly. "The pendant knows. It remembers my mother. It remembers the line she came from. I am not here to steal, not here to challenge, only to claim what was always mine, and perhaps what was always ours to understand together." The glow intensified. The hum in the hall became a low, resonant vibration like the steady beat of a heart. Dragons shift. One of the younger dragon delegates hissed, startled. "Impossible," she said under her breath. "Only dragons should command the relics, only dragons." She stopped abruptly, the words caught in her throat as the glow of the pendant shifted, aligning with the human boy rather than the Empress. Zyra's voice was taut. "Stand down," she commanded, though her tone betrayed uncertainty. She knew her authority alone could not quell the effect of the pendant. Her eyes never left Kieran, measuring every breath, every motion, trying to anticipate the next action of a boy who had no apparent training in ether or combat, yet commanded the room with something far older. Kieran's hands trembled only slightly. He had never expected this to occur so publicly, yet he felt the power settle comfortably in his grip, as if acknowledging that the rightful claim was being made. "I do not seek to conquer," he said, letting his words flow carefully, deliberately. "I seek only understanding. The pendant responds to bloodlines, not titles. My mother's line, her history, her sacrifices are intertwined with yours, Empress. You cannot deny it." A low murmur rose from the assembly of dragons, a mix of anger, confusion, and curiosity. "Intertwined?" An elder lord growled. "How could a human line touch ours? We have ruled these relics for centuries. This child could unravel everything." Empress Zyra's tail lashed against the floor in agitation. She had never faced such a challenge so openly, and she had trained her entire life to command obedience through fear and power. Yet here the relic refused to respond to her, responding instead to the human's quiet, unassuming presence. "You will speak nothing more of it," she said, voice rising to a dangerous pitch. "The pendant belongs to Draconis. This hall, this summit, this empire, do you hear me, belongs to us." Kieran's gaze did not falter. "The pendant belongs to those it recognizes," he said softly, and with that, the strands of light between the pendant and charm flared brighter, sending thin arcs of luminescence along the hall's polished floors and walls. The humans gasped, stepping back in awe while dragons stiffened, claws digging into the stone. The aura of the pendant filled the room, pressing on every mind with a subtle insistence. The bloodlines were calling, the reckoning had begun. Zyra's composure cracked slightly, a rare human-like flicker of doubt crossing her sharp features. She inhaled slowly, fighting to maintain authority, and turned her eyes on Marshal Calith. "Keep them at bay," she said quietly, "but do not touch the boy. Watch him, learn what is happening." Calith nodded reluctantly, a soldier trained to act, yet aware that brute force could ignite a disaster. Kieran lowered his hands, letting the hum of the pendant settle, though it continued to glow faintly. He did not look triumphant, only steady. The room, once a theater of dragon dominance, had shifted subtly. Allies and adversaries alike now regarded him with something different, curiosity edged with wariness. The human boy had spoken, and the relic had answered. The summit was no longer a simple negotiation. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And in that moment, every breath in the hall felt heavy with uncertainty, as though the air itself waited to see which destiny would claim the next move. The hum of the pendant deepened, filling the hall with a vibration that pressed against the ribs of every human and dragon present. Kieran stood still, the small charm in his hands radiating warmth, pulsing in perfect synchrony with the jewel at Empress Zyra's throat. The light between them had intensified, weaving filaments of silver and gold in patterns that seemed both ancient and alive. Murmurs swept through the human delegation like a tide, some startled, others hushed in awe. The dragons stiffened, wings tensing beneath their robes, tails flicking with agitation. The Empress herself did not speak, only studied Kieran, eyes narrowed, calculating, measuring. "Your Majesty," Kieran said softly, voice carrying but not raised, "it recognizes me. It remembers my mother, her line. You cannot force it to obey you as you would your court, nor as you would your empire. This pendant answers only to what is true." He held the charm higher, letting the strands of energy connect more fully to the jewel. The hall seemed to darken slightly as the light pulsed, reflecting in every polished surface, in every eye. Zyra's claws gripped the edge of the dais, the tension visible in the lines of her neck and jaw. "What do you mean answers only to what is true?" she demanded, voice sharp, slicing through the hum. Her words carried authority, but the weight of the pendant's reaction undermined it. Even her closest advisors, those who had never seen her falter, felt the shift, the fracture in the foundation of her command. "It is tied to bloodlines, not titles," Kieran replied, calm, deliberate. "My mother carried it, concealed it, preserved it. She understood what dragons cannot see. That power is not only inherited by dragons, nor dictated by dominance. It is awakened by connection, by the lineage that the relic recognizes." He glanced briefly at the humans, then back to Zyra. "This is not theft nor challenge, it is recognition." Marshal Calith's hand hovered over the ceremonial dagger at his belt. His instincts screamed caution, yet the human's composure, the unassuming authority of his presence, kept him from acting rashly. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, voice low, "the pendant, if it truly responds to him, could destabilize the entire summit. Every delegate here understands the significance. One misstep could ignite chaos." Zyra's eyes narrowed, calculating. She had commanded armies, subdued rival houses, and mastered relics whose etheric resonance could level cities. Yet now the jewel on her chest pulsed as if in defiance, responding to a human she had never considered more than a curiosity. Her pride bristled. "I will not allow it," she hissed. "I will control it as my ancestors did, as Draconis always has." The pendant, however, did not heed her will. It flared suddenly, sending a shockwave of light across the hall. Dragons reeled back slightly, instinctively shielding their eyes. Humans gasped, stepping closer to Kieran as though drawn by the energy. The hum escalated, low and resonant, vibrating through the stone, through the air, through every bone and sinew. Kieran felt it in his chest, in his hands, in the tips of his fingers. It was alive, and it had chosen him. "Do not," Kieran said, voice firm, "try to control it. Listen, understand, you cannot bend truth to pride." The words, simple yet measured, carried through the room, and the pendant's glow pulsed in agreement. The dragons shifted uneasily, feeling an unfamiliar vulnerability as the object that symbolized centuries of dominance refused obedience. Zyra's voice shook, barely perceptible over the resonance. This is impossible. The pendant has never," she faltered, caught between disbelief and fear. A single bead of sweat traced down her temple as she realized that her authority, the cornerstone of her empire, might not be absolute. The notion that a human bloodline could command even a fragment of dragon legacy sent a ripple through her mind she had not anticipated. Kieran's expression remained calm, but inside he felt the surge of connection, the pendant responding not just to his voice but to the memory and intent carried from his mother. He had always known it was special, but never like this, never so potent, so undeniable. The hall, the dragons, the humans, they were all witnesses to a phenomenon centuries in the making. He took a small step forward, aligning the charm with the pendant, letting the threads of energy pulse stronger. "It responds because it remembers," he said. "It remembers lineage, not dominion. It recognizes what is true, and that truth cannot be hidden or stolen." A tremor ran through the floor, faint at first, then stronger. The crystal chandeliers above shivered, a few small pieces of dust dislodging and drifting lazily in the glowing light. The assembly of dragons hissed, shifted, some instinctively drawing etheric weapons, though Calith's hand on the hilt kept them restrained. The Empress's voice, once commanding, broke again. "Explain yourself," she said, her tone sharp but unsteady. "You claim bloodline, you claim what exactly?" "I claim what is mine by inheritance," Kieran said, and the glow responded, brighter now, almost insistent. "I claim my mother's memory, her sacrifices, her line. I claim understanding, not war. But the choice is yours, Empress. You can acknowledge this truth or resist it and risk the consequences of defying what is awake." The hall fell silent, the intensity of the pendant's resonance holding everyone frozen. The dragons could feel it in their bones, humans in their hearts, the very air vibrating with the presence of something ancient and undying. Zyra's hands trembled slightly, her pride battling the recognition that her centuries of authority, her lineage, her empire, might not grant her absolute control. For the first time, she understood that a simple human mechanic, unarmed and untrained in etheric combat, had shifted the balance of power simply by existing and speaking truth. Marshal Calith's eyes darted between Kieran and the Empress. "If he is what you say, Majesty, the implications," his voice trailed, but the fear was clear. The relics, the bloodlines, the empire itself, everything was vulnerable now. The Empress's lips pressed into a thin line. She took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to steady herself. The pendant's glow dimmed slightly, pulsing in rhythm with Kieran's heartbeat as if sensing her indecision. The summit had already changed. Alliances, hierarchies, the very notion of dragon supremacy, everything trembled in the presence of a memory, a human, and a jewel that refused to obey. And Kieran knew with an almost overwhelming clarity that nothing in Valora would ever be the same again. The murmur of the hall grew louder, low, and dangerous, as delegates from both dragons and humans exchanged uneasy glances. Dragon lords whispered sharply among themselves, claws tapping against armrests, tails curling and flicking. The human delegates huddled, eyes wide, some leaning forward in fascination, others with fear. The pendant still glowed, threads of silver and gold arcing faintly between Kieran's charm and Empress Zyra's jewel, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to mock centuries of dragon supremacy. Marshal Kalith moved silently behind Zyra, scanning the assembly with a soldier's vigilance. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, leaning close, "the faction leaders are Kieran closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, letting the hum of the pendant fill his mind. The light pulsing between his charm and the Empress's jewel seemed almost alive, breathing, responding to the memory that surged within him. For a moment the grand hall faded, replaced by a dimly lit workshop in Grensport, where the air smelled of burnt oil, ink, and dried herbs. His mother moved carefully, her hands precise, delicate, placing the pendant on a velvet cloth, murmuring words in a language he hadn't understood fully as a child. He remembered her instructions, spoken quietly yet firmly. "This is more than metal and crystal, Kieran. It remembers those who come from the line it honors. Protect it, understand it, but never seek to wield it recklessly. Power without awareness is a blade that cuts its master first." Her eyes had been weary, lined with care and secrets, but full of a warmth that Kieran now felt in the resonance of the jewel. The memory stirred the energy in the hall, and the glow intensified, responding to the surge of recognition and lineage. Opening his eyes, Kieran felt the connection deepen. The hum was no longer just sound. It was thought, echoing memories of his mother's careful studies, the lines she traced in ancient texts, the sigils she copied from scrolls too delicate for everyday handling. He remembered the diagrams she had drawn of relic bonds, how the pendant could respond not merely to touch, but to voice, intent, and recognition of bloodline. Her warnings, once abstract, now resonated with crystalline clarity. Zyra's eyes narrowed, observing the subtle shift in his posture, the almost imperceptible way the charm in his hand vibrated. "What is he doing?" she whispered, though even her own words sounded brittle under the weight of the pendant's resonance. Marshal Kalith, tense behind her, responded quietly, "I do not know, Majesty, but I can feel it. The boy is connecting. The pendant is answering him not by force but by something far older." Kieran's lips moved softly, repeating fragments of words from his mother's notes. He had never spoken them aloud before. The syllables felt foreign on his tongue, yet as they left his mouth, the threads of energy between the pendant and his charm quivered, pulsing in patterns that mirrored the symbols in his memory. The dragons in the hall shifted uneasily, sensing an etheric resonance unlike any they had encountered. Some instinctively drew etheric wards, while others instinctively stepped back, uncertainty etched across their scaled faces. He could feel the memory of his mother guiding him. The careful layering of intent, the recognition of lineage, the subtle harmony of bloodlines, she had understood these things, even as she worked quietly in a world dominated by dragons. Kieran realized now that she had preserved not just a relic, but a key to balance, a means for human ingenuity and dragon legacy to coexist without conflict. That understanding, buried in his childhood memories, now flowed into him like a river released from a dam. Zyra's voice broke through the hum, sharp and commanding. "Step away from the relic, human. This is not yours to command. I am the Empress, you." Her words faltered as the glow flared brighter, pulsing in sync with Kieran's heartbeat. The jewel's resonance seemed to absorb her authority, bending subtly toward the human line it now acknowledged. She gritted her teeth, suddenly aware of how delicate her hold on centuries of power had become. Kieran's hands did not waver. "I do not command," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I understand." His mother's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that awareness, not dominance, was the path to wielding the pendant. He traced the faint sigils on the charm with his thumb, each movement awakening more of the memory embedded in the relic. The hall's light shimmered, threads of energy weaving intricate patterns across the floor, curling around the polished marble and stretching toward the balconies where dragons and humans alike held their breath. Marshal Kalith's fingers twitched toward his weapon, but he stopped. The resonance was subtle, intelligent, unthreatening, and less provoked. "He's interpreting it," Kalith murmured, almost in disbelief. "Not through force but through understanding. It's unprecedented." Zyra's claws flexed against the dais, her tail lashing behind her. Pride warred with caution. She had faced challengers before, subdued rebels and dominated councils. Yet this human, with nothing more than memory, lineage, and understanding, was bending the very relic of her house to a rhythm she had not foreseen. "Explain yourself," she demanded, though the tremor in her voice betrayed the realization that she was no longer fully in control. Kieran's gaze remained on the pendant. "My mother prepared me for this, though I did not know it until now," he said, voice steady. She understood that bloodline alone does not create mastery. Connection, recognition, awareness, these are what awaken the power. I feel it now, and I see that the pendant responds to what is true, not to titles, not to fear, not to dominance. Only to lineage and understanding. The hall shivered subtly, not from wind or etheric force, but from the tension of truth made visible. Dragons exhaled softly, some in disbelief, others with unease, sensing that the centuries of unchallenged authority could shift with a simple recognition of what had always been hidden. Humans leaned closer, inspired and awed, recognizing the latent potential of their own lineages in the presence of a power long thought beyond reach. Zyra's hands tightened, but her voice had lost its commanding edge. "You understand it?" she asked, disbelief threaded through every syllable. The pendant pulsed stronger, almost in agreement, acknowledging Kieran's recognition. She could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on her, the fragile web of alliances and authority trembling. A single human, guided by memory and understanding, was bending the legacy of Draconis in ways she had never imagined. Kieran nodded slightly, a calm certainty settling in him. "I understand, Empress. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to honor what was entrusted to me. To honor what my mother protected. And perhaps to honor what could bind our lines together if we choose to see it that way." The pendant's light shimmered, threads of silver and gold intertwining like strands of destiny, pulsing in harmony with his heartbeat. In that moment, Kieran felt the full weight of his mother's legacy and the fragile, shifting power of the summit in his hands. Zyra's eyes lingered on Kieran, narrow and calculating, as she stepped slightly forward on her dais. Every instinct in her body screamed caution, but beneath the caution was curiosity, sharper and more dangerous than any blade. The pendant glowed steadily, threads of silver and gold pulsing between it and Kieran's charm, as if tethered by memory itself. She had faced rebels, assassins, and rival lords, yet never had she encountered a human who commanded attention through lineage rather than force. The notion unsettled her profoundly. "Very well, human," she said, voice measured, carrying authority, yet each word weighed with tension. "If you claim understanding, then demonstrate it. Show me that your bloodline is not merely a story, a relic of the past, but something the pendant truly acknowledges." She held her hand near the jewel, palm upward, as if to challenge it, and the glow responded, brightening slightly in reaction to her intent. Kieran remained still, the small charm held in both hands. He could feel the threads of energy stretching, testing him yet steady. "I do not seek to impress," he said quietly, letting the resonance fill him, "only to act in accordance with what is true." The pendant responds to lineage and recognition, not to provocation. He took a breath and whispered a phrase his mother had taught him, the cadence and tone precise. The strands of energy between the pendant and charm pulsed in intricate patterns, spiraling outward, faint runes forming and dissolving in the air. Zyra's eyes flicked with surprise. The jewel pulsed more strongly now, responding not to her command but to Kieran's subtle voice. A ripple of unease spread across her scaled features. She had never seen such a reaction. Her own aura, trained for centuries to dominate and subdue, could not sway the pendant. It was a revelation she could not ignore. The human line she had dismissed, thought weak, was now interacting with her empire's most sacred relic. Marshal Calith shifted behind her uneasy. "Your Majesty," he murmured, "this is remarkable and dangerous." The pendant's response is unprecedented, but the boy seems controlled. If he missteps, he did not finish, but the implication was clear. One false move could ignite disaster. Zyra's tail lashed in agitation. She could feel the tension in the council, the uncertain murmurs of dragon delegates growing louder. She had built her life around control, yet now control was slipping through her claws. "I will test him," she whispered to herself. "If he is what he claims, he will endure it. If not," her thoughts trailed, but the threat was implicit. She raised a hand, extending her palm toward the pendant, and subtly invoked an etheric pulse, a test she had never failed. The pendant vibrated sharply, threads of light snapping toward her hand, but Kieran remained still. He did not flinch, his focus unbroken. The energy shifted, almost bending around him, responding to his recognition rather than her power. The hall trembled faintly as the resonance intensified, dragons stiffening, wings tightening, claws flexing in instinctive tension. Zyra's eyes narrowed. The test was simple: measure the response to raw etheric influence, but the outcome was extraordinary. Kieran's calm, his lineage, and the memory of his mother's teachings anchored the pendant. It did not bend to force. It recognized truth. She exhaled slowly, tension easing slightly even as pride bristled within her. This human, this mechanic from the industrial south, possessed something no dragon had fully anticipated. "You endure the test," she said, voice low but audible. "Do you understand what this means?" Kieran met her gaze, steady, calm, yet alert. "I understand that the pendant responds to what is true, Empress, not to fear, not to dominance. It recognizes lineage and connection. I do not act without awareness, and I do not act recklessly." A murmur spread among the human delegates, a mixture of awe and cautious excitement. He controls it without force, one whispered. This is not just bloodline, it is understanding. His mother's teaching, it's guiding him now. The dragons stiffened, some whispering their own fears, others attempting to assert dominance quietly, though the glow of the pendant made hesitation inevitable. Zyra's mind raced. If Kieran could withstand her subtle test, then the implications were vast. Entire councils, centuries of treaties, the balance of power between human ingenuity and dragon legacy, all could shift based on this one human's understanding. And yet the jewel pulsed with recognition, affirming the lineage he claimed. Pride warred with fear, centuries of tradition clashed with the undeniable truth before her eyes. Then you will demonstrate further, she said carefully, her voice regaining some of its usual authority, though tempered now with caution. Show me the extent of this understanding. If your claim is true, the pendant will respond to what you do next, not by accident, not by chance, but by recognition of the line you serve. Kieran nodded slightly, the threads of energy between the charm and pendant tightening like a coiled spring. He could feel the weight of history in his hands, the presence of his mother's guidance, and the palpable tension of the summit pressing in from every side. He spoke softly, articulating another phrase from memory, one that conveyed intention rather than command. The light shimmered and stretched, curling around the hall, weaving through balconies, brushing against dragon wings and human shoulders alike. The room held its collective breath. Even the Empress, poised and proud, felt the subtle tremor of power beyond her control. The pendant pulsed in perfect harmony with Kieran's heartbeat, threads of energy dancing in patterns that told a story older than the Empire itself. The Council began to understand that this was no mere human trick, no artifact to be seized or dominated. The bond had awakened and Kieran was its anchor. Zyra's lips pressed into a thin line, tension coiling through her body. Pride and fear, authority and uncertainty warred within her. She had tested him, and he had endured not by strength, not by manipulation, but by awareness and lineage. For the first time, the Empress realized the human delegates shifted, sensing the tension as well. Kieran, still holding his charm, did not look up from the pendant. His focus remained internal, recalling every lesson his mother had taught, every sigil, every nuance of recognition, every memory embedded in the jewel. He could feel the unease from the dragons, their plotting, their fear of being displaced. It strengthened his resolve. Awareness, not dominance, would guide him now. A subtle flicker of etheric energy traced along the upper balconies, unnoticed by most, but Kieran felt it. A faction had begun testing their own influence, seeking to assert dominance over the pendant through indirect channels, whispering commands and intentions into the weave of energy. The pendant pulsed nervously, threads of silver and gold quivering, reacting to the potential threat. Kieran's hands tightened slightly on the charm, stabilizing the resonance with the calm certainty of recognition. Zyra watched him carefully, weighing every subtle motion. She understood the danger. One misstep by the factions, one rash command, and the summit would devolve into open conflict. Yet the jewel responded to him, not to her authority, not to coercion, but to recognition and truth. She felt a grudging respect for the boy, tempered by the sharp edge of political necessity. He was a human, yes, but the bloodline and memory he carried made him a force that could not be ignored. "Cease your scheming," Zyra said, voice cutting through the low murmur of plotting lords. "Any attempt to seize the pendant without my command will be considered treason. The council will answer to me or to no one." Her tone left no room for argument, yet the energy in the room was taut, fragile, vibrating with the threat of disruption. Kieran felt it, the collective tension, the fear, the ambition. The dragons desired control, yet the pendant would not bend to them. His mother's lessons echoed: respect the relic, understand its lineage, and the power will remain stable. Misuse it or act in fear, and the consequences could be catastrophic. He allowed the glow to settle slightly, a soft pulse to calm the room, but the undercurrent of unease remained. From the balconies, whispers rose again, this time sharper, plotting more boldly. "If we cannot claim it, we must neutralize him," one hissed. "The boy cannot be allowed to destabilize the Empire." Another nodded, flicking scales in agreement. "The Empress hesitates. If she cannot act, we will. The jewel will obey only one line or none." Zyra's eyes met Kieran's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. She understood the stakes. The council plotted, the factions sought advantage, yet Kieran's bloodline, his calm awareness, and the pendant's resonance held the room in delicate balance. Any misstep could ignite open confrontation. The twin suns outside cast long streaks of light into the chamber, and the pendant pulsed once as if measuring the moment. The council remained poised, factions plotting, humans watching, dragons tense. Kieran, holding the charm, felt the weight of history and memory, understanding that the summit's fragile balance rested in his hands, and in the choices of those unwilling to accept that a human could hold the future of Valora in quiet recognition. The tension in the hall snapped like a taut cord. Marshal Calith's hand darted toward the pendant, a sudden motion that sent a ripple through the council chamber. His fingers brushed the jeweled chain, and the light flared violently, threads of silver and gold whipping outward, striking the walls and balconies in arcs of radiant energy. The room froze, human and dragon alike, as the pendant pulsed with a resonance that was not merely defensive. It was alive, intelligent, and aware. Kieran's hands shot forward instinctively, gripping the charm tightly. No. His voice echoed across the hall, calm yet commanding, carrying an authority that startled even the dragons. The pendant responded immediately, the threads of light snapping back toward him, forming a shimmering cocoon that enveloped both charm and jewel. The air vibrated with a low, steady hum, pressing against the lungs and bones of every observer. Zyra's eyes widened, crimson light reflecting in the polished marble floor. "Calith," she bellowed, voice trembling between command and fear. Her claws clenched the edge of her dais, tail lashing violently behind her. "What are you doing?" I was going to secure it," Calith stammered, frozen in the sudden onslaught of energy. His plan to neutralize the human's influence had been precise, disciplined, and decisive. Yet the pendant did not respond to force. It recognized truth, lineage, and awareness. Now his motion had triggered its defense. The dragons in the hall hissed and recoiled, wings fluttering nervously, tails curling in alarm. Sparks of energy danced along the stone floor, igniting faint trails of etheric light that traced across the room. The human delegates gasped, instinctively shielding their eyes, some whispering prayers or legends, others standing rigid in awe. The hum of power was not merely sound, it was pressure, intent, memory, and recognition made manifest. Kieran's gaze locked on the pendant. He could feel the surge of energy, the raw intelligence of the relic, and his mother's teachings guided his hands. He whispered a single phrase, soft and deliberate, letting his bloodline and memory resonate with the jewel. Instantly, the chaotic energy calmed slightly, threads of light pulsing in a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. The cocoon of energy held, neither harming nor yielding, but asserting control through understanding rather than aggression. Zyra leaned forward, eyes sharp and calculating. "It bends to him," she muttered, almost under her breath, voice edged with disbelief and grudging respect. "Not by force, not by dominance, but by lineage, by recognition." She felt a stir of fear beneath the surface, a rare tremor of doubt that she had not experienced in centuries of rule. This human, calm and unarmed, had harnessed a power that could unseat centuries of authority. Calith struggled within the invisible field, his armor rattling faintly as the threads of energy tightened. "It's holding me," he gasped, realizing that brute force was meaningless. The pendant did not respond to threats or intent to control, it responded to Kieran. He could feel the latent power of the relic pressing against him, intelligent, aware, almost maternal in its precision, keeping him restrained without causing harm. Kieran's voice remained steady, soft yet resonant, carrying across the chamber. "The pendant does not serve force, Calith. It serves recognition, lineage, and awareness. It answers to truth, not command. Your action was unaligned." The threads of light quivered, almost in reprimand, before settling into a steady rhythm that reinforced the cocoon around the pendant and charm. The dragons muttered among themselves, tails flicking, wings shifting nervously. "Unbelievable," one hissed. "A human controls it with nothing but words and intent." Another growled, "We were wrong to underestimate him. This changes everything." Zyra's claws flexed as she weighed her next move. "Release him," she commanded softly, almost cautiously, though her own pride bristled. "Observe, learn, the boy may endure, but the council must understand the consequences of his presence." Calith exhaled sharply as the cocoon of energy loosened slightly, allowing him to step back, shaken but unharmed. Kieran let the charm settle at his chest, the threads of energy pulsing calmly now, glowing with a soft rhythm that spoke of recognition rather than threat. He met Zyra's gaze, calm and deliberate. "This is why I warned you, Empress. The pendant does not yield to dominance, it answers lineage, memory, and awareness. It is not a tool, it is a sentinel of what is true." Zyra's lips pressed into a thin line. Pride warred with caution, authority with fear. She had faced rebellion, treachery, and challenge in her centuries of rule, yet none had manifested as clearly as this. A human, steady and unarmed, controlling a relic of the Draconis line through nothing more than understanding and bloodline recognition. She realized the summit had shifted irreversibly. Control had moved beyond her alone. The human delegate stirred, whispers spreading like wildfire. He controls it," one whispered, voice trembling with awe. "Not with force, with recognition. This is unprecedented." Others nodded, leaning forward, eyes wide, understanding that centuries of assumed hierarchy were cracking under the influence of lineage and awareness. The dragons bristled, some angry, others cautious, realizing that brute force was irrelevant here. The balance of power had shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. The council could no longer act without consideration of the human before them, and the Empress herself had to reconcile centuries of dominance with the reality of a relic that would not bend to pride or command. Kieran inhaled, feeling the pendant pulse in harmony with him. The hum softened, the threads of light stabilizing, yet the energy remained a living force in the room. The chamber was silent now, every delegate aware of the precarious balance. He knew this moment marked a turning point. The human line and the Draconis legacy intertwined in ways that no history, no decree, and no dominance could erase. Zyra exhaled slowly, crimson eyes locked on the boy. "Very well," she said, voice measured but taut. "The pendant recognizes you. But understand this, Kieran Tallow, your actions here will determine whether the Empire stands or whether it fractures." What? Kieran nodded slightly, holding the charm against his chest. "I understand, Empress. I do not seek to fracture, only to honor what is true and what my mother entrusted to me." What? The hall remained suspended in tension, threads of light weaving across balconies and armrests, a silent testament to the awakening of a power long dormant and to the fragile equilibrium now centered in the hands of a human who had finally embraced his lineage. The chamber was silent, the pendant's hum now steady, almost meditative, threading through the hall like a living pulse. Kieran stood at the center, charm in hand, the threads of silver and gold linking him to Empress Zyra's jewel. Every delegate, dragon and human alike, held their breath. The past hours had shifted centuries of authority and pride. The summit was no longer a display of dominance, but a testament to recognition, lineage, and understanding. Zyra's claws rested lightly on the edge of the dais, her eyes narrowed, crimson scales reflecting the glow of the pendant. Pride warred with awe. She had witnessed rebellion, treachery, and threats to her throne, but never had she seen control asserted without aggression, without force, simply through bloodline, memory, and awareness. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease slightly. "You have endured the trials," she said, voice steady, "and the pendant answers you. Speak, Kieran Tallow, what do you propose for the Empire's future?" What? Kieran's gaze swept across the hall, pausing briefly on every human delegate, every dragon lord, every council member. "The pendant recognizes truth, Empress," he said softly, deliberately. "It does not yield to fear nor to force. It answers lineage, memory, and intent. My mother preserved it so that those who understood could guide it wisely. I do not seek supremacy, I do not seek dominion. I seek recognition, understanding, and a path where human and dragon lineages may coexist without fracture." A murmur ran through the hall. Humans leaned forward, awe and hope mingling in their expressions. Dragons stiffened, some skeptical, some wary, others curiously intrigued. "Coexistence," one elder lord hissed, tail flicking in agitation. "After centuries of dominance, you speak of balance." What? Kieran lifted the charm slightly, threads of light stretching gently toward the jewel at Zyra's throat. "Balance does not weaken.